Her laughter came thin through the hallway, a bright line that didn't belong to the room I was in. I stood at the doorway between the kitchen and living room and watched her phone sit on the coffee table like a forgotten glass of water, face down, close enough to reach, far enough to feel deliberate. We'd talked about the conference earlier. She'd mentioned it like it was the weather. Quick, clean, with an edge I didn't recognize. It's just a weekend conference. She'd waited a beat, measuring me with it. I nodded once and kept my voice steady. She didn't bother with more. When she brushed past me on her way to the bedroom, the silver bracelet on her wrist caught the light from the window. I hadn't seen it in months. It usually lived in a shallow dish on her dresser, tangled with hairpins and a few coins. Seeing it there, neat against her skin, made me look twice. It was the kind of thing she wore when she wanted to be seen. In the living room, a suitcase sat open with the zipper curled back like a question. Not packed, not even started, just open. I could have asked when her flight was, what sessions she planned to attend, who she'd be seeing there. The questions lined up easily. I let them pass without names, the way you let a train pass when you're not going anywhere. Her laughter rose again, then flattened. A door clicked, water ran. The phone lit up once, a banner sliding across, the conference logo tucked into the corner. I looked away before I read more than that. Some lines you don't cross early. Not if you want to be sure later. We'd been quiet around each other lately. Not the heavy kind. More like a room that had been aired out too long. You noticed the draft when you stopped moving. She'd started teasing me about being old married when I asked about her week, and there was a sting in it that used to be a smile. Small things, small angles shifting. She came back into the living room with her laptop under her arm, hair in a quick knot, bracelet glinting each time she moved. I might be late a couple nights this week. Prep for panels, she said, setting the laptop down and lining the edge with the table. No explanation beyond what she could pack into that word prep. I nodded. She waited for something stronger. I didn't offer it. I rinsed a mug and set it to dry, then put it back. She didn't ask for tea anymore, and I didn't make it by reflex. We were both saving ourselves the correction. Her tote bag sat upright by the couch, tidy in a way that looked new. She had a way of making new things look like old habits when she wanted to. At some point, the hallway quieted. The air settled. She leaned on the doorframe and watched me like I was a show she'd seen before and was only half interested in. Don't make a thing of it, she said, referring to nothing and everything. I gave her a calm look. I won't. The television remained off. The sink stayed empty. She typed while standing, then sat without looking at me. The bracelet slipped down her wrist and stopped at the hinge of her hand. I noticed it and kept it to myself. I picked up my keys from the dish and put them back. It was a small movement, a way to give my hands something to do. The house held its breath the way a room does when a window is cracked open and no one mentions the breeze. She laughed once more, softer this time, to someone not in the room. I let the pause settle. I wasn't going to chase explanations around a coffee table. The weekend would come when it came. I would be ready to pay attention. The next morning she was up before the alarm. The hallway light bled under the door, then clicked off. I heard the muted thud of a closet sliding shut, the careful silence of someone trying not to be heard. By the time I reached the kitchen, the pot was cold and the second mug sat where I'd left it, upside down and clean. Her keys made a small ring against the bowl, the silver bracelet chiming once as it brushed the edge. She kissed the air near my cheek and said she had an early call. The word hung there. I nodded, reached for the mug I always use, and watched the door ease back into its frame after she left. The house felt wider for a minute, then settled. The pattern held. Earlier out, later in. Each reason added a layer. Traffic, a last-minute task, a quick stop. The stories grew extra branches, details that didn't change the trunk. She spoke fast and light, as if speed could make weight disappear. I didn't press. I filed away what didn't fit. She stopped lingering over the morning news. No barefoot shuffle, no half-finished toast on the counter. Her phone traveled room to room with her, face down, and when it lit up, the light stayed under her palm. In the evenings, she sat angled away on the sofa, her socks half on, half off, eyes on a small screen. A pause would open between us, and she'd fill it with a line about the weekend. I let the pause settle and didn't give it more than it asked for. When she did look at me, it was through a surface, glossed, bright, efficient. Once, her wrist flashed as she reached for her bag. The bracelet captured a slice of lamplight, and I remembered how rarely she'd worn it before. I made a small note in my head and moved on. People noticed without saying it. Midweek at a friend's place, the table talk shifted when I walked into the kitchen. Someone laughed, then covered it with a cough. Another person asked if I was getting enough sleep in a tone that was really about something else. I gave the safe answer and rinsed my glass. In the living room, she held court on a story I didn't recognize, her hand finding the bracelet like a habit. A friend I'd known for years caught my eye and looked away a beat too fast. It wasn't unkind. It just drew a line I hadn't seen before. Texts started coming in pairs instead of groups, plans addressed to her, summaries sent to me after the fact. Ride shares turned into separate arrivals. A chair would be saved for her. Mine stayed available. It wasn't dramatic. It was logistical, and logistics can speak louder than opinions. I watched the alignments move, not with accusation, just with quiet math. People place their bets even when they don't call them bets. At home, I kept our routines going by muscle memory. Laundry folded. The plant near the window turned toward the light without help from either of us. She dropped the bracelet into the ceramic dish one night and left it there. The next morning, it was gone again, a small, silver meteor that traveled only according to her weather. I didn't ask what time she would be back, and she stopped offering estimates. We moved through the same rooms like trains sharing track but headed in different directions. When she laughed in another room, I let it pass through the wall and fade like any other sound. I wasn't hunting for a revelation. I was checking the seams. The weekend was coming into focus the way an address does as you turn onto the right street. I kept my hands still, put my keys back in their place, and waited to see what would arrive without being chased. It was one of those casual nights that pretend to be effortless. A low table with bowls that no one touched, a playlist that knew how to stay out of the way. We'd come because we still did, because saying no would say too much. I stayed near the bookshelf, a step outside the center of things. She flowed through the small conversations, the surface version of herself, laughing when she meant to. I heard it on the offbeat of a joke. A name floated out, soft enough to pass as nothing. I didn't know it. Someone tacked on. "He was at the last thing, right?" And the air thinned by a fraction. She paused long enough to count, then found a smile that made it easy for everyone. Her glass spun once on the table. The silver bracelet caught and flashed, the little clasp facing up like an eye. It hadn't been on her wrist in months. I remembered it from a single morning she went for coffee with. An old connection, coming home a shade brighter, her words tidy, her phone set face down and harmless on the counter. I didn't look at her. I looked at the window, at the dark beyond it. Across the room, someone glanced at me in a way, the way people do when they think sympathy is contagious. Another friend cleared his throat and redirected, asked about the conference with a practiced neutrality. She talked about panels and name tags and a hotel that everyone likes because it's convenient. She didn't say which one. No one asked? The bracelet slid with each movement, a quiet punctuation. Loyalties have a temperature. You can feel when they cool. A couple who normally found their way to us each time stayed anchored to the far end of the couch. Her closest friend measured me with a tiny nod that could mean anything. Later, in the kitchen, while we rinsed dishes we hadn't used, she told me she might have to leave a day early for prep. I lifted a plate to the rack and let water run between my fingers. I didn't test the story for leaks. I'd already seen where it bulged. When the name came back again, different mouth, same syllables, her hand went to the bracelet as if to fix it. It didn't need fixing. She laughed a half-second late, then found a better subject. I kept my breathing steady, kept my posture even. People wait for signs the tide has shifted. They read them out of nothing if they have to. I didn't give them one. It made the room adjust around me instead. On the way out, coats and polite goodnights, she brushed my arm and said, "You were quiet." I tied my shoe, slow and simple. "Long week," I said. She watched my face for a flicker. There wasn't one to offer. In the car, she checked her phone, screen bright on her knees. The bracelet tapped the case twice, a small metronome. I turned on the engine and gave the night back to itself. I took the name with me and placed it where I keep things that matter later. Morning slid by without comment. She left early again, coffee in a travel cup, keys in a quick clatter that sounded practiced. The door closed with the same even click as always. I stood there for a beat longer than I needed to, then picked up the mail and cleared the small drift of papers by the console. That's where I saw it, a corner of white sticking out from beneath a half-filled notepad. I didn't go looking. It was just there, asking to be straightened. I lifted the notepad, smoothed the sheet, and let the handwriting settle into focus. Saturday, 6:30. Atrium Lounge. Then a street I knew, one turn off the conference hotel. No names. No explanation. Just time and place. I let the paper rest on my palm. The house was quiet in that useful way when every small sound presents itself. The refrigerator hummed. A neighbor's car door thumped once. I read the line again, then set the note back exactly as I found it, edge-aligned, as if misplacing it would change its meaning. I'd carried a name home the night before and put it away. The note didn't offer the name. It didn't need to. Proximity can do most of the talking. The silver bracelet lay in the ceramic dish by the door, a soft coil catching the square of sun that had found the hall. She hadn't left it there in months. I touched it with a knuckle and watched it tilt, the clasp turning like an eye. There was a time when it never left her wrist. Now it moved around the house like a small signal, turning up where it didn't used to. I left it alone. I made eggs I didn't taste and washed the pans so there'd be one less thing unattended. When her text arrived, "Running late again, don't wait," I answered with a thumbs up and nothing else. She didn't call. Neither did the friend who usually checked on weekend plans. Group messages had been quieter lately, replies drifting past me to land somewhere else first. People adjust. They always do. By late afternoon, I stood at the counter with her itinerary open on the screen. The hotel address sat there, plain. The lounge on the note wasn't inside, but you could see the lobby lights from its windows, close enough to feel like part of the same room without having to be. I thought about asking her what she had lined up between sessions, about suggesting a place she might like nearby. The words arranged themselves, then unarranged. I closed the tab and took a slow breath I didn't announce to anyone. When she came home, she dropped her bag by the couch and went straight for the shower. The bracelet was gone from the dish when I checked the hall again. Water ran. I wiped a faint ring left by her cup and threw the towel into the hamper. Small order in small places. Later, she sat opposite me and scrolled, angled away just slightly. The note stayed under the pad where I'd put it. I didn't mention it. I didn't need her to confirm what the city map already had. I've learned there are moments when you push, and the thing you're pushing against pretends to be the push. I let the time and the address sit where they were. The day would arrive all by itself. The message came late, the screen pulsing once on the table and going still. She was in the bedroom with the door half closed, the shower having emptied the mirror of fog not long ago. From here I could hear drawers slide, the soft clatter of something metal against wood. The bracelet, probably. She'd taken to wearing it again like a quiet badge. "Are you up?" the text read. A friend of hers, one of the ones who could laugh through anything until they couldn't. I let it sit a moment. "I am," I wrote back. Tiny bubbles, then a pause long enough to count. "I'm worried about her," came through. Another beat. "And about you." I kept my thumb still. The urge to pull at threads had passed a while back. I've learned that letting people arrive at their own sentences tells you more than questions do. "Go on," I typed. "She asked me to say she'd be with me this weekend if anyone asked," the next message said. I didn't agree. I told her I didn't want to be part of anything. She got upset. A second later. "I'm not trying to stir things. I just don't like where this is headed." I felt the room narrow, not from shock, but from the clarity of it. Loyalties had started to rearrange themselves in small, quiet clicks. People who once orbited her had begun to drift, adjusting their positions so they could see better. It wasn't grand. It was practical. There was another message. A photo from earlier in the week, her at a bar after a team dinner, the kind of place with soft lights and clean glass. She's turned slightly away from the camera, mid-laugh. The silver bracelet is visible, a bright line at her wrist. The timestamp matched the night she told me she'd be late finishing something at the office. No need to correct anyone. The picture said enough. "She told me the hotel changed last minute," the friend added. "But she gave me a location that doesn't match the conference email. Maybe I'm overthinking. It just felt off." I tapped the edge of the phone with a fingernail and let the pause settle. Through the door, the latch clicked and her steps crossed the carpet. The light in the hall came on, then off. A cupboard door whispered. Routine, but rewritten. "I appreciate you telling me," I wrote. "Don't put yourself in the middle." That was important. People like to feel righteous when they switch sides. It burns them out faster. "I'm sorry," came back. Another message. "I won't cover for her." That line held more weight than anything else. It meant she'd already told someone no. It meant she'd drawn a line she hadn't drawn before. "Take care of yourself," I replied. That was the end of it. I archived the thread and placed the phone face down. No screenshots saved, no stars. I didn't need a gallery of hints to believe what was happening in my own house. When I stood, I caught the bracelet's reflection in the dark of the glass door to the patio. Not in the dish. Not forgotten. Worn with intention. It had always been more than metal to me. Now it was just a marker I could see from across a room. In the morning, people would smile a little tighter. Invitations would split into two lists. The group thread would go quiet when she spoke and pick up again when she left the room. I didn't need to plan for any of that. It was already underway. I turned off the lamp and let the room settle back into the kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions. Morning slid in without asking much of us. She stood by the counter, scrolling, and told me the weekend would be different. A rescheduled panel. A dinner she couldn't skip. The words arrived prepackaged, easy to stack. We had a plan for Sunday. It folded with a soft shrug. I didn't try to prop it back up. I rinsed my cup, set it edge-aligned with the sink, and let her move through the kitchen as if she were already somewhere else. Small revisions started showing up in conversation. On the phone with a friend, she described our week as tense, a clever word that doesn't accuse and still points. She skipped over the part where she'd been living on the far side of our rooms. She mentioned I'd been particular about her schedule, which is a neat way of saying I noticed it at all. The silver bracelet flashed as she talked, her hands cutting the air like she was slicing a shadow. Once it had been a gift, worn lightly. Lately it came on for certain days, like a uniform. The circle around us adjusted themselves. A couple we used to see on Thursdays texted separately now. Her name headlined an invite. Mine showed up downstream, or not at all. In the group thread, a story was told twice. Once warm when she nodded along, and once cooler, after. I didn't correct anyone. One friend called, careful voice wrapped tight, telling me to give her room. The wording was harmless on its face. It carried a line beneath it. People don't announce their decisions in these moments, they demonstrate them. By evening, our house felt staged. The living room lamp drew a pool of soft light across the rug. She sat near the window, the phone tilted just enough to keep the screen a private lake. The glow climbed her wrist and caught on the bracelet, blues slipping around silver. A message arrived, then another, then a little flurry that lifted her mouth at the corner. She typed with a rhythm that didn't match work. When it buzzed again, she took it into the hallway and spoke in a voice tuned too low to travel. Doors weren't slammed. Nothing dramatic. Just the careful management of sound. I stacked plates, wiped the table, and moved quieter than usual. No one had asked me to, but the house seemed to prefer it. We passed each other 2 or 3 times without touching. She said she was tired and carried her bag into the bedroom. I stayed where I was and let the couch accept my weight. The television came on with the volume barely there, murmur instead of dialogue. In the reflection on the dark screen, I could see the doorway and the sliver of light from under it. It didn't flicker. Earlier she had told a story about me misplacing her keys again, which isn't a thing that happens. It was a small, useful version of me she could hold up when needed. "He's been a lot," I heard before the phone slipped into quiet. Not untrue, maybe, depending on the audience. Not accurate either. I found my shoes where I always leave them, lined in a straight row that somehow looked apologetic. Her suitcase stayed half open on the chair by the window, a scarf tossed like a marker across it. The hotel address was starred in her calendar. The note I'd found days ago didn't need decoding anymore. The bracelet rested on top of a folded blouse as if it had more than one job now. Later, when she came back to the living room for water, it was on her wrist again, cool against the glass as she took a sip. She caught me looking, and for a second she offered a blank smile, the kind people practice in elevators. I watched her phone light the ceiling with a pale rectangle when she set it down screen up, only to flip it over a second later. That small, careful motion told me more than any string of explanations could. I didn't ask who. I didn't ask why. Those questions make noise and don't land anywhere. I let the silence sit with us, not a threat, just a fact. By the time the clock slid past midnight, I'd stopped arranging excuses in my head. There was nothing left to defend or untangle. She had her version. I had a set of observations that didn't require an audience. The loyalties around us were repositioning. I could see where the chairs would end up before anyone pulled them out. I didn't need to predict anything else. I folded the throw over the back of the couch and clicked off the lamp. The room gave me back my shape in the dark. I wasn't going to chase or perform. I started clearing a small space inside the noise, not for her explanation, but for what I would say when it was time to speak. She came in quiet, keys placed carefully on the counter like she didn't want to wake anything. I didn't turn on the lamp. The room held a low blue from the street. She was still wearing the silver bracelet. It flashed when she pushed her hair back and waited for me to say the first risky thing. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I want to put a few things on the table and leave them there." Her posture lifted a fraction, prepared for impact that didn't come. "You said the conference is this weekend," I went on. You've been leaving earlier, coming back later. That's fine on its own. But then there was the name at Dan's place the other night. I let the name hang without texture. You shifted when you heard it. I saw that. I made a note. She exhaled, a soft scoff disguised as air. It's a conference. I know, I said. There was also a note under the papers in the study. Time and a location a block from the hotel. I recognized the street. I asked myself why that needed to be hidden. I didn't come up with a good answer. I also got a message from someone who's usually on your side, saying they were worried. The temperature changed there too. She waited for a reaction I didn't offer. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She flipped it face down. A first name flashed before it went black. Another usual ally, now half quiet. I want you to hear me, I said steady. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm describing what I've observed. She folded her arms. The bracelet slid to the edge of her wrist and stopped on a small bone. In the blue light it looked colder than I remembered. I was near the hotel yesterday, I said. On an errand. I sat in the lobby for a minute. I saw a familiar face at the desk. The same name from the gathering. They were checking in. Maybe that's nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. She set her jaw. So you're checking up on me now? I said I was on an errand, I answered. I didn't follow anyone. I sat. I watched the elevators open and close. That was enough. I let the pause settle. You can tell me it's all misread. You can tell me it's exactly what it looks like. I'm not pushing you toward either. She took a few steps, then stopped. The bracelet slid again, caught on the heel of her hand, nearly came off. She fumbled for the clasp and missed it twice. For a blink, the tone of the room changed. Her voice softened without landing anywhere. You're making this into something. I haven't made anything, I said. You've been making something. I'm catching up. Her eyes moved to my hands, like she expected a list or proof. I didn't have either in my palms. The list was in the air between us, stripped down to times, places, names. You could have asked me before all this. The sentence broke on its own. I'm asking now, I said. Not for answers. Or direction. I nodded toward the suitcase by the door. If you're going, you're going. I'm not going to stand in the doorway. But I won't carry a story I don't believe. The streetlight shifted across her face and disappeared. She looked smaller or just farther away. The bracelet finally slid free and hit the floor with a sound that didn't belong to anything else in the room. She flinched and stared at it like it had dropped by itself. We both watched it settle. Neither of us picked it up. Outside, a car rolled past. Inside, the phone buzzed again and went quiet. I could feel the chairs moving in our circle, the careful rearranging that happens when people decide where to sit. Some were already scraping back from her side. She seemed to sense it too. Her mouth opened like she might chase them, then closed, choosing not to show it. I'm going to sleep in the other room tonight, I said. You can have space to think. I've said what I needed to say. She nodded without agreeing. Her hands stayed by her sides. She didn't reach for the bracelet. I walked past it, past her, down the hall. I didn't check if she was watching. In the spare room, the air felt clean and undecorated. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet find its level. I didn't need her to fill it. I'd placed the facts where they belonged and left the rest of it alone. By morning the spare room had a new, impersonal quiet. I folded the blanket, opened the blinds halfway, and let the thin light lay where it wanted. The house carried that particular hush of two people choosing different corners. She moved carefully in the kitchen. Cupboards opened and closed without clatter. When I walked in, she was already dressed, hair pinned back, the conference tote by her feet. The silver bracelet had found its way back to her wrist, the small clasp turned inward. She kept her eyes on the sink as if the pattern in the steel needed studying. I'll be at the hotel after lunch, she said. It wasn't an invitation, just placement of a piece on the board. I nodded and filled my mug. We avoided big words. I kept the weather and the mail and the calendar in simple lanes, then stepped out of them. The decision had settled in during the night, and had no edges left to argue. I gathered what I needed and didn't stand in doorways staring at things. A jacket, the book I'd been pretending to read. The photo frame stayed face down, as we'd left them after repainting months ago. By noon I'd carried 2 bags to the car. She wasn't there to watch, so there was no performance to stage. On the dresser in the hall sat the small dish for loose change and keys. The bracelet had been there often enough that its absence looked louder than the objects present. A ring of dust, a faint arc. I left a note with a line or two. No instructions, no ultimatums. Just coordinates. Where to send what, when to expect the rest. I left my copy of the key under the wooden bowl by the door, then changed my mind and set it on top. Clearer that way. The first place I went was not far, a short-term rental with blank walls and an honest draft. I put the bags down and didn't unpack right away. The silence here wasn't between people. It was the kind that gives you room to move. By evening, my phone found me. A message thread flickered back to life with careful phrasing. A mutual friend asked if I was settled somewhere safe, then added that plans had shifted for the weekend, that some were reconsidering attendance at her conference dinner. The word reconsidering carried more weight than it usually does. I answered politely and didn't ask for updates. Over the next days, the circle rearranged itself without announcements. Photos appeared from gatherings I hadn't planned to attend. Her name was tagged less. One couple returned a set of dishes she'd loaned months ago, knocking softly and avoiding eye contact like they might break something invisible. Another sent me an apology for not seeing sooner what had been in plain sight. I told them it wasn't a contest anyone needed to win. I passed the hotel once on my way to the office. In the lobby's glass, I saw a reflection of a man who looked like me, pausing just long enough to decide not to step inside. I kept moving. Later, someone mentioned she'd arrived early and spent most of her breaks on her own. The shifting loyalties didn't look like sides-locked battles. They looked like chairs quietly pulled back from a table. At home, or what used to be, a delivery pickup came and went. I'd labeled the boxes cleanly, my handwriting even. I didn't set traps with the labels. Just a life in nouns. On the third afternoon, a small envelope showed up at the rental, no return address. Inside was the silver bracelet, wrapped in tissue, cool against my fingertips. There was no note. I held it, and thought of the easy way it used to nestle against her skin, the little click when it hit the counter at night. It had always caught light with a kind of stubborn optimism. Now it stayed dull until I turned it. I didn't keep it. I set it in a plain box and mailed it back to her office with a brief line, "Belongs to you." I stood at the post counter while the clerk waited and asked about insurance. I shook my head. There wasn't much left to explain after that. People adjusted. Her story thinned in the places that used to be busy. Mine got quieter in a better way. I walked most evenings, hands in my pockets, passing windows that offered other lives without needing any of them. When she called once, late, I let it ring and watched it stop. The next morning, sun edged the cheap blinds and made a grid on the floor. I stepped inside it and got on with my day.